May it breathe your will of inspiration as we talk about an abstract thing. Help us in some way come to understand your love and your presence in this creation in a little bit more fuller way. And Lord, of course, redeem these words of mine for the purpose of your glory. Amen. I have a parable that I'd like to share with you today. It's one I've been sitting on for a while. I've been so excited to share this cute story with you. It's a story written by Kierkegaard, actually, in the mid-19th century. And here it is. I'm so excited to have you think about this story. Suppose there was a king who loved a humble maiden. The king was like no other king. Every statesman trembled before his power. No one dared breathe a word against him, for he had the strength to crush all opponents. And yet this mighty king was melted by the love of a humble maiden. How could he declare his love for her? In an odd sort of way, his very king. If he brought her to the palace and crowned her head with jewels and clothed her body in royal robes, she would surely not resist, for no one could resist him, but would she love him? Maybe she would say that she would love him, of course, but would she truly? Or would she live with him in fear, nursing a private grief for the life that she had left behind? Would she be happy at his side? And how could he ever know? If he rode to her forest cottage in his royal carriage, with an armed escort waving bright banners, that too would overwhelm her. But he did not want a cringing subject. He wanted an equal, a lover. He wanted her to forget that he was a king and she a humble maiden, and to let their love cross the gulf between them. For it is only in love that the unequal can be made equal. The king, convinced that he could not elevate the maiden without crushing her freedom, resolved then to descend. He clothed himself as a beggar and approached her cottage incognito, with a worn cloak fluttering loosely around him. But this was no mere disguise. Instead, it was a new idea. He renounced the throne to win her hand. Friends, this is the story of Revelation. And perhaps that's not what you were expecting me to say. Revelation 21, verse 3. Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God will be with them and be theirs. Now let's talk about Revelation for just a moment. And I want you to do something that might be a little hard. I want you to try and forget everything that you've ever been taught or assumed about the book of Revelation. Images of Armageddon, of the Antichrist, of planes, trains, and automobiles left unpiloted because of the rapture. Forget about all of the war and the flames. And I ask you to forget it all for a minute and consider Revelation as a story about how our God desires to love and share a life with us. The author of Revelation, John, the same guy that wrote the gospel, he was given this vision, this revelation, to bring to the people at a very specific kind of time. And it's a time that we could identify with, I think. The year was 70 AD, and the Roman armies under the command of Nero had just laid waste to the city of Jerusalem. They mowed it over, including the temple, And what more, this destruction of the temple sort of denotes the beginning of a long and brutal season of persecution against Jesus' followers, who were at the time just sort of thought of as a troublesome, radical sect of Judaism. All of this was sort of a spiral of loss. The loss of the temple was a spiritual death. The temple was God's house, and for 500 years it had been their place for prayer and ritual. The temple was the root of their culture and their way of life, their society. And now they all sort of lived under an umbrella of threat. They were left asking big questions like, are we truly safe? Who are we now? And is this seriously the world in which I live? Think with me, bring to mind a moment in your own life, in our own nation's history, when we have felt like we were coming apart at the seams. Consider what this country went through in the hours and days following the attacks on 9/11, when we were realizing our vulnerability, when we were looking at our neighbors with a suspicion, when we turned on the TV to encounter this new rhetoric of finger-pointing that left us all aghast. Or perhaps think about the minutes and hours following a school shooting, like Sandy Hook or Columbine or Parkland, name any of them. All of a sudden, our world feels different. And we too are asking questions like, are we safe? Who are we now? Is this seriously the world that we live in? That's the tone. In Revelation, the citizens of the world feel defeated and bruised. There is an inhumanity around them that is grievous. Their optimism is starved. Their hope is impoverished. And so into that tone, God responds. Now, I can understand why some people swear there is evidence to support the concept of rapture in the Bible, because there are times when we all just desperately want Jesus to sort of just suck us up into the sky so we can live in heaven and be done with it all. But God's response is never an escape clause. Instead, God is sort of raptured down to earth to take up residence with us for eternity. God declares this steadfast commitment to the creation that he made to these people whom he loves, by saying that the earth would be his location, that this would be the place of our salvation, even our eventual heaven. God says that nothing that is going on here is beyond redemption, beyond God's healing reign, beyond God. Think about that parable for a moment. The king wanted to elevate the maiden whom he loved, to lift her from a place of humility, to clothe her with jewels and royal robes. The king wanted to soothe away all the anxiety that laid on her heart so that she would know that she was loved truly. And yet the king knew that he could not just snap his fingers and draw his love up out of the mire, for that would be false. Love, real love, godly love, is grown in and through the mire. And so God steps down from glory, shedding his robe of divinity and taking on the fleshy-ness of incarnation to be with his church, to be with us, to work with us to clean up the mire, to work through the illness and the bigotry and the apathy and the systemic sins that have so burdened this world that was meant to be our Eden. God chose lowliness. God chose us. Now, we like to think of heaven as a city in a cloud tucked behind those pearly gates of St. Peter, and with any luck, with streets paved in chocolate. And honestly, that might be. We don't know what our Creator's house is like. Augustine dreamed about it in his book, City of God, as did William Blake in his work, O Jerusalem. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed about it in his speech, I Have a Dream. But all we truly know about God's city is that this is a place of life and wholeness and reconciliation and perfect justice. God says that our heaven, our spiritual forever home, our temple, our new Jerusalem will one day be here again on earth. This beautiful place that God built, it needs some elbow grease, but it will one day be an Eden again. Nothing is too far gone. To paraphrase John a little bit here, he said, when I see the new heaven and the new earth for the first time, then I saw the new heaven and the new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. But I saw a holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down from the heaven, from God. And I heard a loud voice saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. God is here. Barbara Rossing liked to compare the New Jerusalem to the new Narnia. C.S. Lewis wrote about this new Narnia as an escape from the old Narnia. It was an entryway into a more deeper, more truer, more present place. Everything was more radiant there. It was a deeper country there. No good thing could be destroyed. And where there was a new Jerusalem, our heaven, a world within a world. And so what if, when we die, when we join Christ, of that we can be certain, what if we don't float up into the clouds to a city paved in chocolate, behind pearly gates, but what if we stayed somehow, but not quite here? What if we were returned to a creation as an Eden? What if we returned to a world where there was no cancer, no AIDS? What if there was no poverty or hunger? Where there was no need for border wall policies? What if we were again reconciled with those we had loved and lost here at home? And what if we have everything that was good and whole and perfect about life and relationships, and none of those things that sought to break us? Revelation at its core points us to God's will for eternity, relationship. Whatever that looks like around that is a whole bunch of fun questions. It's redemption. A whole and vital, renewed relationship. God wills to restore this world, this creation that he loved, that was praised in the psalm that we explored earlier. This beautiful creation. God is in relationship with us and it. And God will not abandon it. Whatever it is that awaits us at our end, or the end, whatever that is, whether it is a city in the sky with chocolate roads, or that is here, somehow, we can be sure that it will be better than we ever expected, because Christ is at the center of it. As Paul said in the 2 Corinthians, so we must fix our eyes on not what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is truly eternal. Children of God, this week, I want to leave you with this compelling idea that God has stepped down from glory to be in the work of the world today. that God is busy wooing us and wooing creation, inviting us into loving, full relationship. And what if we acted like God was here? What if we behaved working with us? What if we worked side by side with our Lord, rebuilding and restoring this Eden again? As followers of Christ, we are urged to live in a way that bears forward God's love. Of that, we can't deny that. And I don't know about you, but this whole New Jerusalem thing in Revelation sounds amazing, and it sounds a little magical, a little wonder-filled. But our world needs it, now more than ever. And so perhaps we should help. Amen.